Hi, I'm Kylie, supporting you to make the art you love creating. In this video, we'll be comparing the cost between brands of matte, gloss and gel mediums, along with the application tips I use that have enabled me to save about half of what I was spending on these mediums. I look at the full range of qualities from top of the range like Golden and Liquitex, mid-range like Atelier and Holcroft, through to craft brands like Ranger, Mod Podge and discounted brands. There are some very surprising results, so be sure to stick around for the recommendations. I use large quantities of these mediums because I use so much collage in my art. I love to lay down book pages and vintage papers as my surface, and I was finding that these matte and gel mediums were the highest cost in creating my art simply because of the volume. So I did this cost analysis for myself and actually looked at the price per mil or fluid ounce and balanced that with the effectiveness of the product, and I thought I'd share how to use a combination of products to get the best value. So in this video we won't be looking at the features of each of these mediums. However, I do have another video where I show them all in action and swatch them and explain what I would use each of them for, with loads of tips for collage and mixed media. So this is just a quick little sort of recap on cost, whereas if you want to know more details in full, you may like to check that one out. But very quickly, whilst these acrylic mediums are very similar, there are choices to make regarding the viscosity, which is how thick or thin it is, the sheen, which is how matte, satin or gloss it is, and the quality, whether it's artist or craft grade, which is why you see quite a few versions of the similar thing here. In regards to economy, it's not just about the price. So it's also about how to use less product, and some of the product saving tips that I've found that make a big difference is to use the right product for the right application. So fluid medium, which is extremely almost watery, a little bit thicker than water, but it is very fluid, which is like this one is a very fluid one, this Liquitex. This is great for, things like this tissue paper, this is deli paper, these kind of really lightweight items. Even, for example, these old vintage book pages are pretty light. That would be fine for that as well. Using the fluid product for the softer or lighter papers or collage materials is the right match. And then likewise, if you're going to be using cardstock, or this is craft paper, which is extremely heavy, even things like, for example, burlap or anything that's got some weight to it, you're best to use your heavy gel or your heavy body product. This would still work, so if you've only got this, that's totally fine, and I have seen a lot of people still just use this for everything, but for my way of working, I found that I just use so much more product of this to make sure this lays down well, and it's a waste of product, whereas I could use a heavier product and I won't need nearly so much. So that's the first thing that makes a difference. The other thing in terms of saving cost is to consider the quality for the application. So the reason that we choose a top of the range high quality matte or gloss medium is because I want the layers above my collage to go down really well, and for the pencil to draw nicely, and for the watercolour to move the way I want it to. And if I'm using a cheap product, I find that I don't get that same level of, I just don't get the best out of my products in the next layers, and I get disappointing results. So that's one of the reasons we'd use a good quality product. The other one is that if we're using it to mix with our paint, we don't want to have a really good quality paint and then add a really cheap binder into it. That's sort of a waste of spending money on a good quality paint. So you sort of want to match the quality of your medium to the quality of your paint if you're mixing it. But then there's plenty of times when you don't need a good quality. So I make sure that I stretch to having more than one on the go, and I just pick the right one for the circumstance. So as an example, I was just making these little collage pieces to put together as greeting cards, which, is just like a bit of fun collage that I just, and then when I need a greeting card, I've got a bit of stuff there to grab and put together. And for those, I can get away with using a really inexpensive product that doesn't matter. It's not going to go on a wall. It's not going to go in a journal and I don't have to worry about it sticking to the other page. It's not going to be taking extra mediums on top that matter very much. So for these kind of fun little projects, just have a cheap product on the side there that you can pick up for those. Likewise, in terms of collaging, it's actually the layer that goes down on top of your collage that you want to draw on and so on, but not the layer that goes underneath the papers. So I've often, especially when I'm doing a really big area like a big canvas, for those big products, especially when I'm using heavy papers, then I will just use my super cheap products, and then I'd use the super cheap ones on the underneath, but then when I go over on the top, then I'll go to the better quality. And that sounds like a little bit probably pedantic, I suppose, but it just really saves a really considerable amount of cost. The other thing that just to keep in mind is that although let's take the most pricey product that is generally that I've probably got here for the most part, this it looks like it's quite a big expense to pay $30 for this jar here. However, if I'm going to be using this to mix with my golden paints to make my golden paints go further, it's really paying for itself because I'm going to be saving money on my paints. And I mean, that's not going to be true if you're doing it for paints that cost less than your medium. So you wouldn't do it on your cheaper paints. This is Series C, but certainly for paints that are Series D or that are more expensive, to thin them out with the gel or thicken them up, either way that you want to go, then you're going to save money on your paints. So there's more economy in it than what it appears at first. Now, in terms of doing a cost comparison for the brands, I've tried to even the playing field by reviewing all of the ones, and it'll all detail be in the notes, but mostly reviewing the ones that are around this sort of medium size here, which is like 250ml or 8 or 237ml or around 8 fluid ounces. And that's to keep them, because you do get better economy as you go larger. And in some cases, especially some of the products that are sold in craft stores, they often don't come in this size, so they're smaller. So they're going to, they are going to be a little bit more expensive because they are in a smaller quantity. In terms of the Tim Holtz ones, I have actually reviewed this size or the next size up. It's just that I don't own it, so that's why you can see it there in the smaller tub. The other thing to consider is in terms of quality. Golden does set the benchmark for quality from my opinion, and I'm sure from many others. I mean, there are a couple of other brands that are up there with Golden, but essentially most people would acknowledge that Golden is the premium brand. So it's kind of helpful to use them as a bit of a benchmark when you're looking at the cost of Golden and then looking at how everything else relates to that. So when I actually went through and compared them all based on price per mil or fluid ounce, there were some really surprising results. And that is that the most expensive products were Ranger products. So Ranger products, we've got Tim Holtz and Dina Wakley. I do have another one here of Dina Wakley's. So I just am really surprised that a product made by Ranger, which essentially makes products for craft stores, you don't find them in fine art stores or anything like that, has actually come out more expensive than the Golden. Not to say it's not worth it, because maybe it's because it's in a smaller jar, which might be convenient and might just make the cost more accessible for someone. But I think the thing is that I'm sure most people don't realise that's the case, and that they could in effect be paying for Golden product slightly cheaper even than getting the Dina Wakley product at their craft store. That being said, it is particularly this ultra thick. I do actually like the product. It's just that I can't see how a product coming out of Ranger would be, and I don't know this, but I just can't see how it would be at the same level as a product coming out of Golden. The reason that I have them is that I do like the small size for travelling, and I don't really go anywhere without, when I'm travelling and I'm taking my art supplies, I always would have gel medium with me. This is the smallest Golden size, so I do find it convenient to have a smaller one. And I do find that because Dina Wakley is a art journaler, she has made these with those kind of mixed media layers in mind, and they do take product on top of them really well. So they are nice to use, but to me they feel overpriced. So the other one that is at the top of the pile in terms of cost, even higher in cost than Golden, is Tim Holtz. Now these I've put in because they are called collage mediums, and so that's what we're talking about today, and maybe people would want to know. But they are entirely different than pretty much anything that we've got here, in that one of the things I like, and Tim Holtz says this is what he doesn't like, so that's why he made these, but I personally like to be able to move things around for a little while. You know, if I put my collage materials down and I find that it's not sort of sitting where I want it to, I've got a bit of time to move it, whereas the Tim Holtz ones, you cannot move at all, and it dries absolutely instantaneously. So, I mean, that is an advantage if you want it to dry quickly, but for me, that's not how I use collage medium. So, however, they are super handy for almost like just basically a liquid glue. You know, almost use it like if you just wanted to quickly add a chipboard on there which said sort of a greeting or something, and you're running out the door. Perfect. This vintage one is really interesting in that it does give everything a lovely discoloration, as if the product, the papers are older. It sort of gives them a nice brown transparent overlay, and so that can be nice as well. So they're at the top of the list for price. Then we come to Golden, which is fourth on the list, and that is only so that comes in at about 12 cents per mil, and then the Liquitex ones are only about 11 cents per mil. So there's not much difference there. The next product in cost was the Mod Podge, which is interesting because even on their website they don't claim for it to be an artist grade product, and yet it does come in a bit more pricey than some of the other artist grade products. However, it is archival, and really I would never recommend Mod Podge for mixed media art or collage if you're using acrylic paint, or if you're just working on paper and those kind of products, like in your art journal, where you're essentially not wanting something to feel gluey. So to give you an example, if you have a look inside this, you can see, just because I haven't used it for a while, you can see how tacky and gluey that is? That it smells exactly like PVA. That's very different than the way the gels feel like. This is some matte gel Liquitex that I've decanted out of one of the larger jars, and it's been sitting around for a long time as well, but it's still really soft and viscous. It's not behaving in the way that glue would behave. So yeah, the Mod Podge really is very much like a glue, and a lot of people want to know about Mod Podge and how it compares, which I've talked about in my other video. So that's why I just wanted to include it in the cost comparison. It just doesn't come up as cheap as probably what you expect it to come up. The next two that are really good options are the Atelier and Holcroft. As you can see, I've completely used this entire jar up, so it's actually empty, so I can't really show it to you, but this and these two come up at a very similar cost. And the other thing about them is they're very regularly on sale compared to some of these kind of brands. They don't have quite the same finish that the Golden and the Liquitex have, but they certainly do the job. I mean, this one is probably my least favourite in terms of the artist grade products, in that it has quite a grainy kind of texture, and I prefer things a bit smooth. But it's still, I mean, as you see, I've used the whole jar. So still, and I tend to use it mostly for the underlayers that I mentioned. These really are a great alternative to a cheap product for the economy that you'll get out of them. You'll get a better quality product for a similar price. Which brings us to the last product. These are the two soft and heavy gel mediums that this Portercraft brand is just like a really cheap brand. It does say on here that it's archival. Yeah, I paid $6 at the craft store, but I can't find hardly anything about it online. And you can even just tell by the fact that it's just got a really dodgy lid that doesn't really seal. So, well, it does seal, but not very well. And that even that actually does have an impact, because if you get the product coming down here, you end up not being actually able to open the lid. It's very difficult to actually keep it clean so that it doesn't get stuck. So before long, I'd probably have to be cutting that one open. Price per mil, this worked out to be 6 cents, whereas this Atelier one, which is sold in art stores, is only 7 cents per mil. And that works out $2 per fluid ounce. This works out at $1.50 per fluid ounce. So, for the tiny bit extra, I would think you're a lot better off getting the Atelier one. The way that I like to get even better value, which I know would seem super obvious, but I'll just mention it anyway, and it does depend on you being able to stretch to that cost in the first place, is because this genuinely is my most used art product. It is worth the economy for me to get the super large tub. Even if you don't need this super large tub, there is the in-between one, which is 500 ml or something similar to that anyway, 473 or something like that. And I tend to just decant it. So I get this big one, decant it into these small jars as I need, and that would last me, a few months. And the thing is that brings the price down to, if I was to just buy that at full price, this brings it down to 7 cents per mil. And as we mentioned before, this is 6 cents per mil. So really, you are getting a super good quality product, quite similar to your cheaper products. So that is the best way to do it, but it does require you stretching to that cost in the first place. But maybe, the 473 ml one is a happy medium. So my top recommendation is taking all of this into account and also having a look at the uses that I have for them. If I only had to choose one product, it would be the Liquitex matte gel. I couldn't get by without it actually. I use it literally all the time. And the reason I like it is that if I don't have fluid medium, the matte medium hands, the only difference, just in case I've confused you, is that the word gel's in the name for this one and it's not in this one, which just means this one's runnier. I don't always have this on hand. If I run out, it might take me longer to replace it because I'm not using it all the time. You can use it from the ultra thick knead right through to the fluid if you have to. So it's just a good all-purpose one, and it's wonderful for drawing on top of, which is what I like to do. So I really like the performance of it. The page feels completely product free. Once you've used it, you can't notice that it's on there, whereas I know that when you use some of these sort of products, you end up with that sort of thick layer that you can of even though it's transparent, it's sort of got that tacky feel to it. You don't get any of that with this. So that's my top choice. But if I could, I would also get this one so you've got your matte gel, your matte medium, and then I would also choose one cheap one just to make sure that these go further. And my choice would be the Atelier for the cheaper brand, and knowing that it's still an artist grade product. And for my cheaper brand, sometimes I choose gloss because it's going to go under the page anyway, but also It's just handy to have a gloss if you need it. So that way I've got gloss covered. I don't use gloss very often simply because it makes the pages stick together in an art journal, and if I want gloss on a canvas, I'll just put a gloss varnish on at the end. But there are times, like for example, if you're doing it over the top of photos, they don't seem to come out well unless you're using gloss, or if you're doing impasto paint techniques that you might use gloss. So it is handy to have it. So that would be my top 3 picks. I've by no means road tested them all, and the information here is just simply based on my own experience. So yeah, I'd be really interested to hear how you've experienced your favourite brands. So please pop them in the comments. And please let me know if this was helpful by liking, and be sure to subscribe. And check out my other videos on how to use matte, gloss or gel mediums and your mixed media art supply requirements.